The chilled crystal glass felt like an extension of the silence in the vast, empty dining room. Khalid al-Jamil sat at his usual table, a solitary island in a sea of starched white linen. Outside, the city lights blurred into a watercolor wash against the rain-slicked windows of the penthouse restaurant. Inside, the air was sterile, conditioned to a perfect temperature that held no warmth, no memory, no life. It smelled of money and lemon-scented polish. He was a man who commanded boardrooms across continents, whose name shifted markets with a single whispered word. Yet here he was a ghost haunting his own opulent prison. Every night was the same. Table for one. The finest food, prepared by a chef whose salary could support a dozen families, served on porcelain that cost more than the car the young waitress probably drove. He watched her now, moving with a quiet efficiency that seemed at odds with the weariness in her posture. Her name was Clara. He'd learned from the small brass tag on her uniform. She was young, perhaps 20, with eyes that held a depth of storm-tossed gray that didn't belong on a face so new to the world. He saw the slight fraying at the cuff of her crisp white shirt, a detail so minuscule it would be invisible to anyone else, but to him, it was a glaring imperfection in his perfectly curated solitude. It was human, it was real, and it bothered him more than a stock market plunge. He ate his meal with mechanical precision, the flavors of truffle and seared scallops turning to ash on his tongue. It was sustenance, nothing more, a transaction. He paid for the food, the view, the silence. And every night, Clara served him with a professional distance that he appreciated. Until tonight, as she cleared his main course, her movements paused. Her hands, holding the heavy plate, trembled almost imperceptibly. He looked up from his untouched dessert menu, his gaze cool and questioning. She met his eyes, and for the first time, the professional mask slipped, revealing a flicker of raw, unvarnished curiosity. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper above the distant hum of the city. "Sir," she began, her throat tightening. "Forgive me for asking. It's not my place. But why do you eat alone every night?" The question hung in the air, a fragile, beautiful, and dangerous thing. It was a violation of the unspoken contract between them, the pact of anonymity he paid so handsomely to maintain. His jaw tightened. The world he inhabited did not ask such questions. It made demands, it issued ultimatums, it signed contracts. It did not inquire about the state of a man's soul. He was about to deliver a chilling rebuke, a verbal dismissal that would send her scurrying back to the safety of the kitchen, her curiosity forever extinguished. But the genuine, aching sincerity in her gray eyes stopped him. She wasn't being impertinent. She was being human. And it had been so very long since anyone had dared to be human with him. He let the silence stretch, watching the fear and regret play across her features as she realized her transgression. Then he leaned forward, his own voice a low murmur that seemed to draw all the sound from the room. "Because the company I keep is chosen by my wealth, not by my heart," he said, the words feeling foreign and heavy, dredged up from a place he had long since abandoned. "And my heart? It has no appetite." Her breath hitched. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking as pale and fragile as the porcelain in her hands. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, frozen by an answer that was not an answer at all, but a confession. Clara remained motionless, the heavy plate in her hands forgotten. His words were not just an answer. They were a chasm opening between them, a glimpse into a profound, desolate landscape he called his life. She had expected a simple, dismissive reply, that he enjoyed the quiet, that he was busy, that it was simply his preference. She had not expected a piece of his soul, offered up like a rare, bitter delicacy. The sterile air of the restaurant suddenly felt thick with unspoken grief. She could see it now, looking past the immaculate white thobe and the perfectly knotted guttra. It was in the hard set of his jaw, the faint lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, the way his hands rested on the table, still and controlled, as if holding back an immense force. He was not just a rich man, he was a monument to loneliness. Her training screamed at her to apologize, to retreat, to smooth over the uncomfortable intimacy of the moment with a practiced platitude. But the words wouldn't come. Her own struggles, the mounting bills, her mother's failing health, the constant, grinding worry, seemed to resonate with the strange, sad emptiness in this powerful man. It was a different language of suffering, but the grammar was the same. Khalid watched her internal conflict, a flicker of regret warring with a strange sense of vindication. He had wanted to push her away, to reinforce the walls of his solitude. Instead, he had handed her a key. He saw the moment her professional composure fractured and something else, something deeply empathetic, took its place. She finally lowered the plate to her service tray, her movements slow and deliberate. "I understand," she whispered, and the simple words held more weight than any apology could. It wasn't the "I understand" of a subordinate placating a superior. It was the "I understand" of one weary soul acknowledging another. She turned to leave, her retreat as quiet and graceful as her approach. Khalid watched her go, the space she left behind feeling colder and emptier than before. He looked down at the bill, a trivial sum. He took out a pen, his hand hesitating. Giving her money felt crude, a way of reestablishing the transactional nature of their relationship. But it was the only language he was fluent in. He signed the check, adding a tip that was more than her monthly rent. It wasn't charity. It was an apology, a thank you, a desperate attempt to say something he no longer had the words for. He left without another glance, the echo of her question following him out into the rain-soaked night. Back in the silent restaurant, Clara found the leather billfold. When she saw the amount, her heart didn't leap with joy. It sank. Felt like a wall being built back up, brick by gilded brick. He was paying her to forget, paying her to return to her place. But she knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that she never could. The following evening, a tension hummed beneath the restaurant's placid surface. Khalid arrived at his usual time, the city's glittering skyline his silent, indifferent companion. He fully expected to be served by the maitre d' himself, or any of the other anonymous staff members who knew better than to breach his formidable perimeter. He had paid for his privacy, and he expected it to be delivered. He was surprised, then, when Clara approached his table. There was a new determination in her stride, a quiet resolve that had replaced the previous night's hesitant curiosity. She held the menu not as a servant, but as an equal meeting him on contested ground. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. "My section," she stated simply, her voice clear and steady, leaving no room for argument. She hadn't spent the tip. The thought struck him with an odd certainty. She hadn't taken the money and requested a different assignment. She had returned deliberately. A silent negotiation passed between them. He gave a curt nod, accepting her terms. The service was different tonight. The professional distance was still there, but it was thinner, more porous. After she took his order, she didn't vanish immediately. She lingered for a moment, her gaze drifting towards the sprawling city below. "It's beautiful from up here," she said, her tone conversational. Like all the sharp edges have been smoothed away, Khalid followed her gaze. He had looked at this view 1,000 times and seen only assets, territories, a map of his influence. He had never seen it as beautiful. "From a distance, most things appear perfect," he replied, his voice gruff. "It's when you get closer that you see the cracks. Maybe the cracks are what make them interesting," she countered softly, before turning and walking away, leaving him to ponder her words. She was a puzzle. Young, clearly struggling, yet she possessed a wisdom that belied her years. Later, as she served his coffee, he broke the silence himself, the impulse surprising him. "You are a student?" he asked. She looked up, startled by the direct question. "Yes, I'm studying literature. Or I'm taking a semester off." "Why?" The word was more of a demand than a question. She hesitated, her personal life a fortress she was not keen on opening. But his gaze was not judgmental. It was intensely focused, expectant. "My mother is ill," she confessed, the admission costing her a visible effort. "The medical bills. They don't stop just because I'm in a classroom." There it was. The harsh, ugly reality he insulated himself from with layers of wealth. A life dictated not by ambition, but by the relentless mathematics of survival. His world was about mergers and acquisitions. Hers was about prescriptions and premiums. He thought of the tip he had left, a sum that he wouldn't even notice was gone, and how for her it represented a month of breathing room, a temporary reprieve from a battle she was fighting every single day. A profound, unsettling shame washed over him. Ferris, his ever-loyal assistant, would be waiting for him in the car below, a pristine oasis of leather and silence. Ferris managed his life, shielded him from its unpleasantries. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Khalid felt the shield crack. He felt the cold draft of another person's reality, and it was more bracing than any winter wind. The next few nights established a new, fragile rhythm. Khalid would arrive, and Clara would serve him. Their conversations were brief, islands of quiet meaning in an ocean of unspoken rules. He learned her mother had a chronic lung condition, a relentless disease that chipped away at both her health and their savings. He learned that Clara dreamed of being a writer, of creating worlds with words, a stark contrast to his own life of dismantling and acquiring them. He found himself looking forward to these small interactions, to the quiet challenge in her gray eyes, to the simple, unvarnished truth of her existence. She never asked for anything, never hinted at her struggles beyond that first, honest admission. She treated him not as a billionaire, not as a potential savior, but as the lonely man at table 12. And for that, he was unknowingly grateful. One Tuesday, the sterile peace of the restaurant was shattered. Khalid was midway through his main course when he saw Clara's posture stiffen. She was standing near the service station, her back to him, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. The maitre d' approached her, handing her a buzzing cell phone. Her hand flew to her mouth. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw their impact. He saw the color drain from her face, the way her body swayed as if struck by a physical blow. A choked sob escaped her lips. She whispered frantic words into the phone, her composure dissolving into raw panic. Without a word to her superior, she ripped off her apron, threw it onto a counter and ran. Not walked, ran. She fled through the dining room, a blur of white and black, her face a mask of terror. She didn't see him. She didn't see anyone. She was a person consumed by a single, desperate purpose. The other patrons stared, murmuring in disapproval at the disruption. The maitre d' rushed to apologize to his most valued customer, his face a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. "My deepest apologies, Mr. Al-Jamil. Unprofessional. It will be dealt with." Khalid waved him away, his eyes fixed on the empty doorway through which Clara had vanished. The food on his plate was suddenly revolting. The perfect ambience of the restaurant felt like a mockery. He felt the old, familiar instinct to retreat, to raise his shield and forget what he had seen. It was not his concern. She was an employee, a stranger. Her chaos had no place in his orderly world. But he couldn't erase the image of her face. He couldn't unhear the sound of that desperate sob. It was the sound of a world cracking, the same cracks she had spoken of. He sat for a long moment, the silence of his table pressing in on him. Then he made a decision. He stood, leaving his half-eaten meal behind, and walked out of the restaurant. Down in the gleaming, silent lobby, Ferris was waiting by the limousine, holding the door open. "Home, sir?" Ferris asked, his voice calm and unquestioning as always. "No," Khalid said, his own voice sounding unfamiliar to his ears. "The hospital. Find out which one. Find out what happened to her mother." Now Ferris, ever the consummate professional, showed no surprise. He simply nodded, closed the car door, and pulled out his phone. "Right away, sir." As the limousine pulled into the stream of city traffic, Khalid stared out at the blurred lights, feeling a tectonic shift deep within him. He was willingly stepping into someone else's chaos, moving closer to the cracks. And he was terrified of what he might find. Ferris worked with the silent, ruthless efficiency that had made him indispensable to Khalid for over a decade. Within an hour, As they sat in the hushed interior of the idling limousine a block away from St. Jude's General Hospital, he had a full report. He presented it on a tablet, the glowing screen illuminating the grim set of his employer's face. "The mother's name is Eleanor Vance," Ferris began, his voice a low, respectful monotone. "She was admitted to the ICU an hour ago. A severe pulmonary embolism. The doctors are saying it's critical. The prognosis is uncertain." Khalid stared at the screen, at the cold, clinical text that described a family's world falling apart. He saw the list of pre-existing conditions, the history of expensive treatments, the mountain of outstanding medical debt that was attached to Eleanor's name. A sum that would bankrupt a dozen families, but was, to him, a rounding error in his quarterly earnings. "The hospital?" Khalid murmured, a strange sense of recognition dawning on him. "St. Jude's. Why do I know that name?" Ferris, anticipating the question, swiped to another screen. "You should, sir. 10 years ago, the Al-Jamil Foundation made an anonymous endowment that saved this hospital from bankruptcy. It was after your sister." The name hung in the air between them, unspoken but deafening. Layla, his younger sister, lost to a rare illness in a hospital far from home. The endowment had been an act of desperate, grieving charity, a way to build something life-affirming from the wreckage of his loss. He had forgotten. In his relentless pursuit of wealth and power, he had forgotten this one act of pure, unadulterated humanity. He had saved this hospital, and now, a decade later, it was the same hospital fighting to save the mother of the one person who had managed to pierce his armor of solitude. The coincidence was so profound, so startling, that it felt like the hand of fate itself. But Ferris wasn't finished. "Sir, there is something else. Something unusual. In researching Ms. Vance's background, I looked into her late husband, Clara's father. His name was Dr. Robert Vance." He swiped again. A grainy photograph of a kind-faced man appeared next to a dense block of text. "He was a biochemist, a brilliant one by all accounts. 25 years ago, he was on the verge of a breakthrough in regenerative medicine. Then his lab suffered a catastrophic fire. All his research was lost. He died of a heart attack 2 years later, a broken man. The family was left with nothing." Khalid felt a cold dread creep up his spine. "Go on," he commanded. "The company he worked for was a small biotech firm. After the fire, they were acquired by a larger corporation, a competitor. That competitor, 5 years later, patented a revolutionary cellular therapy that was remarkably similar to Dr. Vance's theoretical work. It made them billions." Ferris paused, letting the weight of the information settle. "The name of that corporation, sir, is Cygnus Innovations." Khalid's blood ran cold. Cygnus Innovations. The very company he was in the final stages of a hostile takeover to acquire. The deal was set to close in less than a week. It was a deal championed by his cousin, Rashid, a deal lauded in the financial press as his most aggressive and brilliant move yet. He was about to acquire the legacy of the company that had, in all likelihood, stolen a dying man's life's work and left his family destitute. He was about to unknowingly profit from the very tragedy that had forged the weary strength he saw in Clara's eyes every night. The rain began to fall again, streaking down the windows of the car like tears. The sharp, unwelcome ring of his satellite phone cut through the heavy silence in the limousine. The caller ID displayed a name from a world away, a name synonymous with ambition and familial obligation. Rashid, Khalid's cousin, his right hand in the family empire and the architect of the Cygnus acquisition. Khalid's thumb hovered over the decline button, but he knew it was futile. Rashid was a dog with a bone, and this deal was his prize. He answered, his voice flat. "Rashid." "Khalid." At last. His cousin's voice boomed through the speaker, slick with a forced bonhomie that always set Khalid's teeth on edge. "I have been trying to reach you. The final papers for the Cygnus deal are ready. We just need your signature. The board is ecstatic. They are calling it the crown jewel of our portfolio." Khalid stared out the window at the rain-lashed entrance of St. Jude's Hospital. Crown jewel. The words tasted like poison. "There is a delay," Khalid said, the decision forming even as he spoke. A complication has arisen, a beat of surprised silence on the other end of the line. Rashid was not accustomed to complications, especially not from Khalid. A complication? What sort of complication? Is it a regulatory issue? Antitrust? My team has assured me every contingency is covered. It's a moral complication, Khalid stated, the words feeling both strange and liberating. The silence that followed was longer this time, thick with incredulity and dawning irritation.
Moral.
Rashid finally scoffed, the word dripping with disdain. What are you talking about? This is business, Khalid, not a philosophy seminar. We are talking about a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that will solidify our market dominance for the next 50 years. Since when does morality have a seat at the table? Since I gave it one, Khalid replied, his voice hardening. I have uncovered information regarding the foundational patent of Cygnus Innovations. I believe it was stolen. He could almost hear Rashid's eyes roll. Oh, this again. Khalid, every great company has skeletons. Rumors. Disgruntled ex-employees. We knew about the Vance allegations during due diligence. It's ancient history. Unprovable. The man is dead, the lab burned down. It's a footnote, a ghost story to scare new recruits. It has zero legal bearing on this deal. It is, frankly, irrelevant. It is not irrelevant to me, Khalid said, his grip tightening on the phone. For the first time, he wasn't just pushing back against a business proposal. He was pushing back against the entire cynical, predatory worldview that Rashid embodied, the very worldview that had governed his own life for 2 decades. I am putting the deal on hold, indefinitely. You are what? Rashid's voice rose, losing its polished veneer and revealing the raw greed beneath. Have you lost your mind? Because of some sentimental nonsense? Because of a ghost? Our family's legacy is tied to this. My reputation. I have spent 2 years of my life building this deal. Then perhaps you should have built it on a more stable foundation, Khalid said coldly. Something has come to my attention here, something that requires my full focus. A waitress at a restaurant. The line went dead silent. So quiet Khalid thought the call had dropped. When Rashid spoke again, his voice was a low, venomous hiss. A waitress? You are jeopardizing a $10 billion deal. For a waitress? I am on the next flight. We will sort this out. You have clearly become distracted, cousin. It is my duty to help you regain your focus. The line clicked dead. Khalid lowered the phone, a cold sense of dread mixing with his newfound resolve. Rashid was coming. The storm was no longer just outside the car. It was heading straight for him. Rashid arrived not like a cousin, but like a conquering general inspecting a faltering front line. He swept into Khalid's penthouse suite, all sharp angles and expensive cologne, his eyes scanning the opulent space with a proprietary air. Ferris stood sentinel by the door, his expression an impassive mask, but Khalid could feel his loyal assistant's disapproval radiating in waves. Rashid wasted no time on pleasantries. He threw a thick leather-bound portfolio onto the polished mahogany table. It landed with a heavy, final thud. This is everything, Rashid declared, his voice tight with controlled fury. The final contracts, the wire instructions, the press release announcing our victory. All it needs is your signature. End this foolishness. Khalid did not look at the documents. His gaze remained fixed on his cousin. Did you know? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. When you were doing your due diligence, when you uncovered the Vance allegations, did you know the full story? Rashid waved a dismissive hand. I knew what was necessary. A disgruntled researcher, a convenient fire, a competitor's good fortune. It's the story of corporate evolution, survival of the fittest. Cygnus was smarter, faster. They won. We are now buying the winner. It is the way of the world. You knew they stole his work, Khalid pressed, standing up to face him. You knew they built their empire on the grave of a good man, and you saw it not as a crime but as a discount. You used it as leverage to lower the purchase price, didn't you? A slow, cruel smile spread across Rashid's face. He had dropped the pretense. Of course. His ghost gave us a 10% reduction in the final offer. I would call that excellent negotiating. His tragedy became our asset. Why are you suddenly playing the saint? You built your own fortune on tactics far more ruthless than this. I never built anything on stolen dreams. Khalid shot back, the words raw with a self-loathing he was only just beginning to understand. I drove hard bargains. I outmaneuvered my rivals. But I never knowingly profited from a man's stolen soul. There is a line, Rashid. And a waitress showed you where it was. Rashid sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. This girl, this nobody, has undone years of work. I had Ferris look into her. A community college dropout, drowning in her mother's medical debt. She is playing you, Khalid. She sees a lifeline, a walking bank vault, and you are so starved for some kind of pathetic connection that you are letting her sink our entire family. The accusation, so vile and so wrong, solidified Khalid's resolve into something unbreakable. He thought of Clara's tired eyes, her quiet dignity, the way she had never asked for a single thing. She hadn't been playing him. She had been showing him a mirror, and he was finally seeing the monster that had been staring back for years. The deal is off, Khalid said, his voice ringing with finality. Furthermore, I am opening a private investigation into the Cygnus fire and the theft of Robert Vance's research. I will use my own funds. Rashid stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief that slowly hardened into pure hatred. You would turn against your own family? For her. She is not the reason, Khalid said, the truth of it settling deep in his bones. She is the catalyst. She reminded me of a part of myself I thought was long dead. A part that still believes in right and wrong. Now get out. This is not over, Rashid hissed, grabbing the portfolio from the table. You have made a powerful enemy today, cousin. The board will hear of this. Your fitness to lead will be questioned. You will regret this. He stormed out, leaving a wake of venomous silence. Khalid walked to the window, watching the storm clouds gather over the city. Rashid was right about one thing. A war was coming, but for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. The battle was swift and brutal. Just as Rashid promised, he went straight to the board of Al Jamil Industries. He painted a picture of a compromised, emotionally unstable leader, throwing away a landmark deal for a woman of no consequence. He called for an emergency vote to have Khalid's executive powers suspended. It was the corporate equivalent of a coup d'état. But Rashid had underestimated the one thing Khalid had cultivated even more meticulously than his fortune: loyalty. He had also underestimated the power of the truth. While Rashid was politicking, Khalid and Ferris were working. They bypassed traditional channels, hiring the best private investigators and forensic accountants money could buy. They unearthed old insurance claims, tracked down disgruntled former Cygnus employees, and found a former lab assistant of Dr. Vance's, now an old man living in obscurity, who had kept copies of some of his mentor's original notes, hidden away for decades out of fear. The evidence was irrefutable. It painted a damning picture of corporate espionage, arson, and theft on an epic scale. On the morning of the board meeting, just as Rashid was launching into his character assassination, an email landed in the inbox of every board member, every major financial journalist, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. It contained the full explosive dossier. The hostile takeover of Cygnus was dead. In its place was a multi-billion-dollar fraud lawsuit and a federal investigation. By noon, Cygnus stock had been suspended, its CEO had resigned, and Rashid's coup had evaporated into smoke. Khalid didn't gloat. He felt no triumph, only a quiet, weary sense of justice. He instructed his legal team to divert all potential winnings from the lawsuit into a new foundation, established in Dr. Robert Vance's name, dedicated to funding ethical and innovative scientific research. His legacy would be restored. His name, once buried under decades of corporate greed, would now be synonymous with hope and discovery. With the corporate war won, he turned his attention to the more important battle. He went to the hospital. He didn't enter with an entourage or the air of a benefactor. He went alone. He found Clara in the grim, antiseptic waiting room of the ICU, huddled under a thin blanket, her face pale and etched with exhaustion. She looked up as he approached, her gray eyes wide with surprise. Mr. Al-Jamil? What are you doing here? He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her. The sterile environment a stark contrast to the warmth he felt just being near her. I heard about your mother, he said simply. I wanted to see if you were all right. She's fighting, Clara whispered, her voice cracking. The doctors say she's stable for now, but the costs, I don't know how. Her voice trailed off, the weight of the impossible burden crushing her. He reached into his coat, but instead of a checkbook, he pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. It was a letter. This is from the new Robert Vance Foundation, he said gently, handing it to her. It seems your father's work has recently been rediscovered. His estate is now the beneficiary of his patents. It's a considerable sum, more than enough. The foundation's first act was to clear all of your mother's outstanding medical debts and to ensure she receives the best possible care. For as long as she needs it, Clara stared at the letter, her hands trembling as she read it. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of disbelief, of shock, of a lifetime of struggle suddenly lifted. My father? She stammered, looking at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning wonder. But how? Sometimes, Khalid said, his gaze meeting hers. The world finds a way to balance the books. He didn't tell her the whole story. Not yet. He didn't tell her about Cygnus or Rashid or the war he had just fought in her father's name. For now, it was enough to see the hope return to her eyes, to watch the crushing weight lift from her shoulders. It was the most valuable return on investment he had ever seen. Months passed. The seasons turned. The scandal surrounding Cygnus innovations faded from the headlines, replaced by the quiet, hopeful news of the Vance Foundation's groundbreaking work. Rashid was disgraced, exiled from the family business and facing legal repercussions of his own. The Al-Jamil empire, under Khalid's new and more conscientious leadership, was more prosperous than ever. But Khalid himself was rarely seen in the gleaming corporate towers that bore his name. His evenings were no longer spent in the cold, sterile solitude of a penthouse restaurant. Tonight, he was in a small, cozy apartment filled with the scent of jasmine tea and old books. The lighting was warm, the furniture was comfortable and worn, and the silence was filled not with loneliness, but with a peaceful, contented companionship. Eleanor Vance, her breathing now easy and steady, sat in a comfortable armchair, smiling as she recounted a story from Clara's childhood. Clara sat on the sofa opposite Khalid, a soft blanket draped over her lap. She was no longer a waitress. The foundation had given her the freedom to return to her studies, to pursue her dream of writing. The weariness was gone from her eyes, replaced by a bright, clear light. Khalid was not wearing his immaculate thobe. He was in a simple sweater and trousers, looking more relaxed and at ease than he had in decades. He held a warm mug of tea in his hands, its heat seeping into his skin. He was no longer Mr. Al-Jamil, the formidable billionaire. Here, in this small sanctuary of warmth and love, he was just Khalid. He caught Clara's eye, and she gave him a small, shy smile that made his heart ache in a way he was beginning to cherish. The soft romance between them had bloomed slowly, cautiously, like a desert flower after a long-awaited rain. It wasn't built on grand gestures or opulent gifts, but on shared cups of tea, long conversations, and the quiet understanding that passed between them in a single look. It was built on the foundation of the two broken people who had met in a lonely restaurant and had, somehow, helped each other become whole. Later, after Eleanor had retired for the evening, Clara walked him to the door. The city lights twinkled in the distance, no longer a map of assets, but a beautiful, shared vista. You never did properly answer my question, she said softly, her hand resting lightly on his arm. That first night, why you always ate alone. He turned to face her, his hand covering hers. He looked into her eyes, the same gray eyes that had seen through his armor and called out to his soul. I was waiting, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. My entire life, I was surrounded by people who wanted something from me. I ate alone because I was waiting for someone who wanted nothing, and who I could give everything to. He saw the understanding dawn in her expression, the beautiful, breathtaking truth of it. He had spent a lifetime acquiring companies, assets, power. But here, in this small, unassuming apartment, with this incredible woman, he had finally acquired what he had been searching for all along. He had found his home. He leaned in, not with the arrogance of a billionaire taking what he wanted, but with the gentle reverence of a man who had finally found something worth more than all the money in the world. He was no longer alone, and he would never be again. The transition from a life of calculated isolation to one of shared intimacy was not without its stumbles. For Khalid, simple domesticity was a foreign language he was slowly learning to speak. He once tried to have the entire apartment building's plumbing system replaced with solid gold fixtures after Clara mentioned a leaky faucet, an act of extravagant problem-solving that she had to gently talk him down from with a mixture of amusement and horror. He learned that buying out a local bakery because Clara had praised their croissants was not a normal way to show affection. She, in turn, had to grow accustomed to the quiet but immense security detail that now shadowed their lives, a constant reminder of the world he could never fully leave behind. But these were minor dissonances in a symphony that was, for the most part, beautifully harmonious. The real work was internal. Khalid was dismantling a fortress he had spent a lifetime building. He started attending the Vance Foundation board meetings not as a silent, intimidating benefactor, but as an active participant, his sharp business acumen now tempered with a genuine desire to do good. He listened to the scientists and researchers, his eyes alight with a curiosity he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He was building a legacy, not of profit margins, but of purpose. Clara, meanwhile, was blossoming. Freed from the constant pressure of survival, her writing flourished. She wrote stories not of billionaires and waitresses, but of quiet courage, of the resilience of the human heart, and the unexpected connections that can change a life's trajectory. Her first collection of short stories was accepted by a small, prestigious press, a victory that was entirely her own. Khalid celebrated by buying a single, signed first edition, which he kept on his bedside table like a sacred text. Their quiet romance deepened with each passing day. It was in the way he would bring her a specific type of tea he knew she liked when she was deep in her writing, or the way she would gently touch his hand during a foundation meeting when a topic reminded him of his late sister, Layla. They had, in essence, created a new family, a small, fiercely protective unit of three, grounded by Eleanor's gentle wisdom and their own shared history. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of her apartment, overlooking the now familiar city, Clara turned to him. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The power? The solitude?" He considered the question seriously. He thought of the empty penthouse restaurant, the silent limousine, the echoing boardrooms. They felt like scenes from another man's life, a black and white film he had once watched. "I miss the simplicity of the solitude sometimes," he admitted honestly. "But it was the simplicity of a prison cell. I had mistaken peace for emptiness. You and your mother, you have taught me the difference between a quiet life and a silent 1 inch." He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "My life is infinitely more complicated now," he continued, a soft smile playing on his lips. "It is filled with leaky faucets, and literary agents, and worrying about whether your mother has taken her medication. It is messy, and unpredictable, and human. And I have never been happier." The confession hung in the air, simple and profound. It was the final brick being laid in the foundation of their new life, a life built not on a business deal, but on a question asked in a quiet restaurant, a question that had saved them both.